Chapter 12, Self-Regulation, East and West. It is probably true quite generally that in the history of human thinking, the most fruitful developments take place at those points where two different lines of thought meet. These lines may have their roots in quite different parts of human culture, in different times or different cultural environments or different religious traditions. Hence, if they actually meet, that is, if they are at least so much related to each other that a real interaction can take place, then one may hope that new and interesting developments may follow. Quote, Werner Heisenberg. The mystical experience is described by the medicine men when they will speak of such things, which is not often because of the ridicule with which such theories are received by most whites, are identical with those recorded among other nations which have developed elaborate occult traditions. It is more than interesting that they should describe their occult power in exactly the same way as do these other far separated races. Quote by Manly Hall. The word magicians is used here not in the sense of the supernatural, but there can be no such thing as supernatural power or event. Neither it is used in the sense of sleight of hand artists, who are popularly called magicians. Rather, we are going to talk about people whose skill and self-regulation seems magical, that is to say, unaccountable. But it is a fact with some effort, the average person can master some of the same feats of physiological self-regulation. Before introducing our subjects and telling what we learned from them, we wish to state our views about the difference between seemingly magical skills and trickery. It is the difference between a yogi who can stop his heart from pumping blood through direct control of autonomic nervous system, and a yogi who claims to be doing this, but is in actuality squeezing the circulatory apparatus with voluntary muscles of the chest and abdomen, forcibly altering heart function. Likewise, it is the difference between Uri Geller and a sleight of hand artist. Stage magicians are admittedly tricksters and cannot perform in a laboratory setting without their props. On the other hand, Uri Geller, like Ingo Swann and many others who can demonstrate parapsychological phenomena, has been observed and studied in laboratory settings. The hand can indeed be quicker than the eye, but is not quicker than the oscilloscope and the metal detector. Things that appear to be unaccountable are not always the results of trickery, as the history of science amply demonstrates. Things found to be unaccountable under rigorous scientific scrutiny ought at least to suggest that the science's ability to account for everything may be imperfect. Alice and I do not know Uri Geller, but we have talked to several of the physicists, both in England and in the United States, who have conducted research with him. We believe that they are not lying, nor have they been fooled concerning the phenomena associated with Uri Geller's presence in their labs. No sleight of hand master can do difficult tricks without years of preparation, including both staging and practice. No magician can walk into my laboratory and forthwith operate my polygraph, my electrometer, my densometer, my monochrometer, my photogalvanometer, my Geiger counter, or any other pieces of my gear that are found in scientific laboratories. It is impossible without their having prepared the lab in advance, and it's presumptuous nonsense for anyone to maintain otherwise. There is nothing of a sleight of hand magician can carry that will manipulate plastic, glass, iron, aluminum, paper, and various other materials at a distance. Nothing, for instance, that will turn Geiger counters on and off. In May of 1974, while in England, Alice and I had the chance to talk with physicist Ted Bastian, John Taylor, and others about children in the British TV audiences who, after seeing Uri Geller bend tableware, found they could do the same thing. It does not seem strange to us that children should be talented in this way. Almost all of the poltergeist phenomena that has been studied in the last 100 years have taken place in the presence of young people at about the age of puberty. It is as if that particular age there is an excess of bioplasmic energy, which in our estimation is the energy which underlies the personal power referred to by Don Juan. More on this later. There seems little doubt that some kind of as yet accounted for energy is connected with human bodies. That by itself is interesting. What is doubly interesting is that under certain conditions, this energy can be manipulated by mind. For instance, in poltergeist kids, the phenomena are spontaneous, not under their control, but those who watched Uri Geller on television tried to bend silverware by willing it, and some of them succeeded. Edward Edgar Case was one of the poltergeist kids, and so was Harry Helgeson, the psychologist whom Gardner Murphy suggested I talk to about my mathematical paper on the adaptation law for vision. While driving to Manhattan, Kansas to meet Harry, Gardner told me that some unusual things had happened in Harry's life, which Harry might tell me about if I asked. Responding to my queries, Harry said that generally he did not talk about his early experiences for fear of upsetting his colleagues. But it was a fact that he had been a poltergeist kid. When he was young, a number of things happened that could not be explained. Chairs rocked, doors slammed, coals flew out of the scuttle and banged into walls, cans slid off shelves. His parents were relieved when the phenomena stopped. How many of these children are there in the United States? Hundreds? Thousands? Whatever the number, such phenomena should be investigated because, aside from all other implications, they provide an important bearing on the question, who are we? Moreover, questions of science should be studied by scientists who, and not taken up as causes by the media and by sleight of hand magicians. Returning to the theme of this chapter, we point out again that research in our voluntary control program has not focused on parapsychology, but has been concerned almost entirely with physiological domain and its self-regulation by volition. It was natural, therefore, for us to be interested in persons like Swami Rama, a yoga teacher from India, Jack Schwartz, whom we think of as a Western Sufi, Rolling Thunder, a Native American medicine man, and some yogis and meditators whom we studied in India with a portable psychophysiology laboratory. We focused almost exclusively in the physiological and psychological domains, not because we were interested in the study of extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. We believe those areas may be important for the average person to know about, but because the first need is to be able to self-regulate. Personal well-being and satisfactory handling of one's life should come first, we believe. In studying people who show unusual inside the skin self-regulation, however, we observe that they almost always show unusual awareness of unconscious processes, both in themselves and in others. Sometimes they appear to have psychokinetic talents as well. Should we be surprised at this? Since it appears that these people have learned to control personal power and have also become aware of normally unconscious processes, it seems reasonable to us that their volition skills might include the regulation of outside the skin energies and ability to demonstrate psychokinetic phenomena. Our experiences with these people indicate that these ins and outs issues are interrelated. In chapter 14, we discuss this interrelatedness at length. Swami Rama. As already noted, Alice and Dale Walters and I began research in self-regulation of autonomic processes in the mid-1960s through a publication of the Menninger Foundation, which is set to psychiatric alumni. Our voluntary controls program came to the attention of Dr. Daniel Ferguson, at that time chief of the medical hygiene clinic of the Veterans Administration Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. In the fall of 1969, Dr. Ferguson telephoned me and said that he had become acquainted with a yogi named Swami Rama, who had demonstrated in the hospital an ability to obliterate his pulse. Dan suggested that with our psychophysiology equipment, it might be possible to obtain a record of what the Swami was actually doing. Would we like to conduct such a project? If we were interested, he would take the responsibility of bringing Swami Rama to the laboratory for a couple of days. Our lab schedule was fully booked at that time, and Swami Rama tended to travel only when the spirit listeth. But arrangements were finally made over and over the Easter weekend. March 28th through the 30th, 1970, a number of experiments were performed. During the first day, we familiarized the Swami with the routine of being wired up and had a chance to become acquainted with him. He was 45 years of age, tall and well built. He reminded me of an Italian Renaissance nobleman. At 6 feet 1 inch and 170 pounds, and with a lot of energy for debate and persuasion, he was a formidable figure. Uncertain about what he intended to demonstrate and not wanting to upset him with the demands, we asked him to tell us what he would like to do. On the second day, Sunday, we attached a minimum number of transducers to the Swami's body in order to minimize the laboratory-induced electric chair effect. The Swami said he would cause the left side of his right hand hypnothenar eminence to increase in temperature several degrees above the right side thenar eminence. Thermistors were attached to the palm of the right hand in the positions shown in the figure 6, and an electrocardiographic signal was obtained between the right ear and the left wrist. Alice and I remained with the Swami in the experimental room, located about 15 feet from the polygraph room, and noted that during the demonstration he did not move his hands. They were placed palms up on a board in front of him. Figure 6 shows what happens in his hand temperature experiment. Swami increased the temperature difference between the left and the right sides of his hand in 2 stages. The first began shortly after the arbitrary 0 time, and the second started when he said, "Be attentive, I will do something." The thermistor on the little finger side of his hand, labeled W for warm, started at a temperature of 90, and after a few minutes had drifted up to 91. The temperature of the thermistor on the thumb side of the hand, labeled C for cool, started at about 88 degrees Fahrenheit, and after a few minutes drifted up to 89. Swami and I had been talking about blood flow control just before the 0 time on the graph. I said that it was about time for us to start this experiment, and he answered abruptly, "I have already begun." Associated with our polygraph record was a voice-actuated relay, which made a mark on the edge of the record so that we could identify places in the record where talking occurred. When we later looked at the record, we noticed that where he said he had already begun, deviations had started in the record. In the first minute, the temperature dropped in both thermistors. Then the W thermistor reversed and went up to its original reading, and the C thermistor continued to drop. After 3 minutes, they were about 7 degrees Fahrenheit apart. We continued talking for a few minutes. Suddenly, the Swami said, "Be attentive, I will do something." Caught by surprise, I said over the intercom, "Be attentive." I could not think of anything else to say and did not know what he was going to do. The record shows that the temperature began going up at both locations of the palm of his hand, and then the C thermistor went down to where it had been, but with the W thermistor kept increasing in temperature until it reached 95 degrees. Eventually, the 2 thermistors were 11 degrees apart, and an increasing 9 degrees Fahrenheit over the original temperature differences. Swami told us that the differential control of the temperature in one hand was one of the most difficult things that he had to learn to do, more difficult than stopping his heart. That seemed unlikely to me at first, but on thinking about it, I realized that the neural controls over the radial and ulnar arteries in the wrist and over the arterial shunts in the hand probably were located within a few millimeters of each other in a section of the central nervous system. The Swami's demonstration showed exquisite differential control over this normally uncontrolled piece of the neural apparatus. After talking another 2 or 3 minutes, the Swami abruptly ordered, "Test my heart immediately." A few minutes later, he said, "What is my heart doing now?" I labeled these on the records as heart rate experiment number 1 and the heart rate experiment number 2. They were the Swami's experiments, not ours. He already knew what he could do and apparently was calibrating our laboratory for his own information. Shortly after the second heart rate experiment, he said he wished to be released. Thinking that he wished to be released from the necessity of maintaining the temperature differences between the 2 spots on his hands, I said, "You can now relax the temperature control of your hands." Shortly thereafter, the record showed that the temperature of the C thermistor began to increase. The third heart rate experiment might be called ours, at least we requested it. Dale Walters called over the intercom and said, "Ask the Swami to slow his heart." Swami heard that and said, "I will do it." Figure 7, showing a summary of all 3 heart rate experiments, indicates that his heart slowed continuously for about 50 seconds from 74 beats per minute to 52 beats per minute. Heart experiment number 1, increasing the rate momentarily, was interesting, but I was not particularly impressed by it because I had noticed that I could do this myself. Experiment number 2 was much more difficult, the Swami said, because of the sudden change that takes place in the heart. Experiment number 3 was impressive because most Westerners, even if they can speed their hearts, cannot start at a normal resting rate and decrease it by 21 beats in 1 minute at will. With reference to experiment number 2 of figure 7, by coincidence, the Swami was doing something with his heart, thereby making it possible for us to observe an unusual occurrence. Our cardiotachometer Sorry. Our cardio-tachometer for recording heart rate can be switched to direct display of the electrical EKG signal, and it happened that just a few seconds before Swami asked for his heart to be monitored, Dale Walters in the control room had switched the cardio-tachometer to direct display. The normal flub-dub of the heart heard for a stethoscope is seen on an oscilloscope or an EKG chart as R and T waves, shown by arrows on the diagram above the rate record. In the normal heart rate, using the electrical pickup from right ear to left hand, the R wave is taller than the T wave as shown in the diagram. But note that just before the heart rate suddenly increases, the T wave becomes larger than the R wave. Since the T wave and the R wave represent functions of different parts of the heart, the record indicates that Swami had developed differential control over sections of the heart, just as he had developed differential control over blood flow in his hands. We mentioned this to the Swami, who said only that this particular demonstration was somewhat risky. After concluding the laboratory work on Sunday, Alice and I invited Dr. Ferguson and the Swami to dinner with us at a local smorgasbord place. While chatting about yogic methods for self-regulation, the Swami surprised us by saying, "I am sorry I didn't stop my heart for you. I know you wanted to see that." "Oh, no, that's all right," I said. "You can do it next time." "No, I will do it tomorrow." "But you can't do that," explained Alice. "You just finished telling us that a person shouldn't stop his heart unless he has fasted for 3 days. And here we are eating dinner." "That's all right," he said. "I want to find out what I can do. Anything I can do with 3 days of preparation, my teacher can do in 3 seconds without any preparation. I've never been wired up like this before, and I would like to find out what I can do." We attempted to dissuade him, but the Swami was insistent. "I'll sign papers saying that the Manager Foundation is not responsible for my death," he said somewhat haughtily. Nothing we said impressed him. At last we gave up. "Don't worry," he said. "I know what I'm doing. I can stop my heart for 3 or 4 minutes and also do something no other yogi can do. I can carry on a conversation at the same time. How long a time would be required to demonstrate heart stopping on the machine since I have not fasted?" I said we would be very much impressed if he did it for 10 seconds. We had earlier scheduled Swami for a lecture in the research department the next morning at 10 o'clock. Then he and Dr. Ferguson were to catch a plane back to Minneapolis. I called Dale that night and told him we would try to run the heart stopping demonstration at 9 o'clock in the morning. The next day, as I was taking Swami Rama with wires draped over his shoulders into the experimental room, he turned and said to Alice, "When my heart stops, call over the intercom and say, 'That's all.'" I asked why he wanted that, and he said, "Since I am not prepared in the ordinary way for this experiment, I do not want to do it too long. I want to be reminded to stop so that I will not forget what I want to do. I do not want to damage my subtle heart." I asked him to explain that, and he said that the heart seen in surgery is only physical appearance of the heart. The way he described it, the real heart is a large energy structure of which the physical heart is only the dense section. These two statements by Swami, that he wanted to be reminded not to stay in the state too long and that he did not want to damage his subtle heart, seemed very significant. That he wanted to be reminded of what was doing implied to me, and when he put himself into the state in which the heart stopped, he might be unaware of what his conscious intentions were. In other words, in order to exert control, he was going to try to be conscious in a state that was normally unconscious. Heart patients demonstrate many peculiar stress related heart behaviors, but not with conscious control. The heart is under the control of unconscious mechanisms in the subcortical areas of the brain. I sometimes tell these people that they are half yogis. By reacting to stress in a certain way, they cause heart problems. But unlike Swami, they do not know how to go into the normally unconscious domain and straighten out the problem. What the Swami was proposing to demonstrate was, in my estimation, of considerable significance of psychosomatic medicine. Not only could the Swami get into this somewhat risky state, but presumably he would get out of it. The question I planned to ask Swami was, how did you get into that state and how did you get out of it? Swami's second statement about the subtle heart is a representative of the general yogic idea of the subtle body, of which the physical body is supposedly a representation of in the sensory domain. Since this subtle heart is allegedly controlled by mind, the demonstration would be consistent with the field of mind theory that we had been thinking about. The experiment was about to begin. I was the only one in the experimental room with the Swami. Dale Walters, Alice, and Dr. Ferguson, and later Dr. Sargent and a few others observers were in the control room. I seated the Swami in the large armchair, which was barely big enough for him to sit in the lotus position. His legs crisscrossed and folded so that the top side of his feet rested on his thighs, and began talking about heart control. Presently, the Swami said that he was going to be quiet for a moment in preparation for the demonstration. Then he said, I am going to give a shock. Do not be alarmed. I thought that he was going to shock his nervous system in some way, but later he said he meant that he was going to shock the doctors and the others in a polygraph room watching the paper record, and he did not want to frighten them. We sat silently, perhaps for 2 minutes. Then, to my surprise, I heard Alice say on the intercom, That's all. I was surprised because the Swami had not twitched so much as an eyelash to indicate that he was conducting his demonstration. After a short period of time, he drew in his solar plexus for a few seconds, then exhaled and looked at me. I could tell from his expression, the glint in his eyes, that from his point of view, the demonstration had been a success. I began asking how one stops the heart when Alice called over an intercom and said, The heart record does not look as we had anticipated. I think you should look at it. I excused myself and went into the control room and was surprised to see the record shown in figure 8. Dr. Sargent said it appeared to be kind of a fibrillation. All of us previously thought if Swami succeeded in his demonstration, the heart would miss a few beats, and the pen would draw a straight line. I returned to the experimental room and told Swami that his heart had not stopped in the way we had expected, but instead had begun beating at 5 times its normal rate. He looked puzzled and said, Well, when you stop your heart this way, it still flutters in there. He fluttered his hands in demonstration. We had not known that, but in retrospect, I could easily see that Swami's method, which caused obliteration of the pulse, might be identified as heart stopping by observers not using an EKG machine. Dr. Sargent felt it might be useful to show the records to a cardiologist at the Kansas University Medical Center. He contacted Dr. Marvin Doon, Dr. Dune showed us slides made from patients' EKG records in which the same phenomena was demonstrated and identified as a state of atrial flutter. A section of the heart flutters. He happened to use the same word as the Swami used. In an oscillatory mode at the maximum rate, the chamber's not filling properly, the valves not working properly, the blood pressure dropping. Suddenly he stopped and said, "What happens to this man anyway?" "Nothing," I answered. "We took his wires off and he went upstairs and gave his lecture." Swami Rama and Daniel Ferguson returned to Minneapolis that afternoon, and our lab began to return to normal. Before Swami left, however, he agreed to return to an extended series of experiments. He said that his teacher had asked him to come to the United States to demonstrate to medical people that the mind can control the body, and he would come back for further demonstrations. 2 weeks later, he sent me the following letter. April 16th, 1970. Most Blessed Dr. Green, thank you very much for your sincere efforts in promoting the truth. I'd like to give you a few suggestions for the future test in the lab. 1. Methods of concentration and meditation. A. Gaze outside in a distance or 1 foot in distance. B. Gaze on the tip of the nose, on the nostrils, gaze on space between the 2 eyebrows. C. Concentration on different chakras, and if possible, the variation of the stability of mind can be recorded according to the plexus, and I want to know the brain waves. D. Concentration with breathing will be very fruitful, inhalation in the bellows. E. Rhythmic breathing in retention and in making breathing finer. F. Concentration on very minute with object within. Concentration on a very big and wide object. G. Concentration on withdrawing the senses from outer object. Concentration in nothingness. Concentration towards negativity. Concentration on positive thinking. Concentration on assimilation, the forces of mind. Concentration on expanding the mind. Concentration on the control of conscious mind. Concentration on silencing the conscious mind and bringing forward the subconscious mind. H. Studying the mind and heart completely in conscious condition. I. The effects of samadhi can be demonstrated if you have any machine to test. J. Samadhi with seed and without seed. K. Samadhi in a plastic capsule which should be sealed, or samadhi in buried condition. 2. Heart test. Slowing down beats to 20 and immediately jumping to 250. B. Complete stoppage of heartbeat without muscle contraction. C. Complete stoppage of heart from 1 1/2 to 3 minutes with willpower. D. Heart stop through a rhythmic way of pranayama by controlling vagus nerves. E. Heart stop with lowest temperature can be examined. 3. Blood flow temperature on the right side of the body and reversing up to 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit. A. Creating artificial tumors and dissolving them with willpower. B. Blood cell experiment. C. Piercing the needle on any part of the flesh without bleeding or any damage. 4. Respiratory tests. A. You can make any mask for nostrils and mouth and verify the retention of breath. B. There should be 2 masks, one for the nose and mouth and another for the eyes, so that close up to 10 feet object can be located after closing eyes, or any book can be read. Note, there are 4 methods in seeing the things after closing them. The first, after closing the eyes, anything can be visualized clearly at any distance, but eyes should be properly sealed and closed. C. Through touching the closed envelope can be read, but eyes should be closed. D. Anything can be read from one room to another, but eyes should be closed. 5. Moving things from one place to another. A. All the spiritual and psychic as well as physical demonstrations will be done in the lab only, and not before or definitely not in the public lecture. Those who are anxious to know the results should come to the lab, and only the lab should be available exclusively for doctors and scientists. B. The experiment of prana solar science can be done on sunny days, and we will fix up the date when I come. C. I thank you very much for your achievements and hope you keep in touch through letters before we meet. I will be sending the lab report from London with film to you. If you wish, I will bring another Swami to give more elaborate tests in the field of respiratory system and heart and weight control. I forgot to mention the sound experiments, which will be very interesting in studying the brain's vibrations and other internal states. It is most amazing that people do not understand the power of mind over body. My effort is sincere, and you will see that there is nothing unscientific in it. Of course, I find some difficulty in explaining certain things which I can do, but I cannot explain how they are done. Doctor, meditation alone is real life. There's nothing higher than meditation. That is my experience in life. Please give my regards to Miss Green. Love, little kitties. Let me thank you again for your kind and gentle behavior. My present address will be care of American Express, London, England. Please remember to the members of your lab, thy own self, Swami Rama. We needed funds to continue the work with Swami Rama. With this letter and the results of the previous demonstrations in hand, I prepared a grant proposal for a private foundation. The funds were granted $42,000 over the next year to carry out various tests and demonstrations described in Swami's letter. Items 1I through 1K were to be demonstrations, he said, in which there would be no breathing. Item 2D was demonstration he had already performed for us. Items 4B through 4D were to be performed while holding his breath. These last items reminded me of Madame Blavatsky's comment about 1885 that to receive or transmit mental information in the most efficient way, it was necessary to hold one's breath. It also reminded me of the Tibetan Buddhist idea that one can maintain a thought without change as long as one does not take a breath. That does not mean that everyone who can hold his breath can maintain a constant thought, but who can hold a thought may be using breath control as part of the technique. Swami Rama returned to India after our March sessions. Alice and I, meanwhile, were invited to organize the first transpersonal parapsychology section of the annual meeting of the Association for Humanistic Psychology to be held at Miami Beach in September 1970. We invited Swami Rama to speak, and he accepted, arriving back in the U.S. just in time to make his presentation. After that, he came to Topeka, and we began the research program described in his letter. At the very first, we conducted Swami Rama through 5 15-minute EEG feedback sections with alpha and theta so he could correlate his states of consciousness with their associated brainwave patterns. Then we began work in items 1A through 1G. When he visualized a wide object within, such as blue sky and small white cloud occasionally drifting by, Swami Rama produced alpha rhythm, a focus on nothingness, also was associated with alpha. The Swami observed, I can tell you, alpha is nothing. To us, the most interesting of the brainwave experiments was the last part of the item, silencing the conscious mind and bringing forward the subconscious mind. When the Swami did that, we observed theta waves in significant amounts in the brainwave pattern for the first time. When I asked him afterward what that state was like, he said it was unpleasant and noisy. All of the things that other people wanted me to do, all of the things that I wanted to do, all of the things I should have done but didn't do came up and began screaming at me at the same time. It was very noisy and very unpleasant. Usually I keep that turned off, but it is useful to look in there once in a while to see what is there. These comments were certainly interesting. The states of consciousness associated with theta waves were not obnoxious to most people we had tested. But then, unlike the Swami, hardly anyone uses a combination of repression and sublimation to bring body energies and psychic energies under control. Swami felt that the presence of theta was not healthy because of these discomforts. Concerning his own health, we had a dim idea of the strenuous method of training he had undertaken. His comment gave us additional information on the possible kinds of awareness associated with the conscious theta state. Persons who have not repressed their physiological and psychological tendencies for whatever reason may not be disturbed by what is the unconscious. But on the other hand, if they have made no effort at all to sublimate the energies, it is probable that they have developed little self-control. The possibility would make an interesting research project. After 5 weeks, the Swami left for a week for lecture engagements in Chicago and Minneapolis. He was back for a few days and then off again for another 10 days. Gradually, it became apparent that the seminars and lectures he was giving in various cities were making it almost impossible to keep a laboratory schedule. Unfortunately, we conducted only about 1/3 of the experiments outlined in his letter. We had planned to study them 1I through 1K toward the latter part of our time together, scheduling some simpler things for the first weeks of our research and more complex things later. In retrospect, it is clear that we went at it in exactly the wrong way. At least the Swami Rama, he had been practicing his austerities before he came to Topeka and was keyed up for demonstrations in a laboratory. If after a short period of adjustment to the research setting he had challenged him to do the most difficult things, he would have immediately attempted to demonstrate them. As it was, however, life at the laboratory became more and more boring to him, and his enthusiasm for research began to diminish. He mentioned his indirectly on occasion, we realized later, but the significance of what he was saying wasn't immediately apparent to us. He was indirectly telling us that his ability to do things depended upon a kind of emotional activation or excitement. It depended to some extent upon being challenged to put up or shut up, as they say. For instance, one day after returning to Chicago, where he had given public lecture, he showed me a Polaroid picture in which most of the chest was obscured by a disc of pale pink light. I asked for an explanation, and he said that he had mentioned during a lecture that it was possible to turn on subtle energy into chakra so intensely that it would become visible to the naked eye. On hearing that, a skeptical physician in the audience had demanded that the Swami demonstrate it so he could take a picture with a Polaroid camera. The Swami said several pictures were taken and that I could keep that one. I asked him why he found it more difficult to do these things in the laboratory than in public, and he responded with flashing eyes. When I'm challenged, all of my powers come up and I can do everything. The blood experiment 3B is worth discussing, even though we did not see it demonstrated because Swami did not complete the experiments planned. In explaining it, he said, just before taking a blood sample, we were to say 20%, 30%, 40%, 100%, or zero, or any other number. Then a drop of his blood would be extricated and put out on a microscope slide, and the fraction of dead white blood cells could be counted. He would kill, he said, whatever fraction was commanded at the time of sampling.